All right. Can everybody see the thing? Cool. Move my speaker view super quick. And off we go. A candle's flame winks out as the last of the wax burns down, leaving Percy alone on his bedroom floor, surrounded by chalk smudges and crushed peppercorns. It's November 2020. Percy has administered his first shot of testosterone earlier today, marking the beginning of a new stage in his transition.
In this moment, however, he is a teenage girl and a witch. The spell he's finished casting is called Secret Beauty, meant to help witches let go of the hate they feel for themselves. For Percy, this hate takes the form of inarticulable feelings about masculinity, being trans in a sometimes hostile world, and saying goodbye to the teenage girl he once was and for this fleeting moment embodies once more. Engaging in the act of play at this pivotal moment loosens the boundaries of what is fictional and what is real in ways that make space for transformation and catharsis. Crucially, this act of lyrical play blends dream and reality without prescribing a particular shape for that transformation to take. In starting HRT and in becoming a teen witch, Percy accepts an invitation to step into something unknown.
Percy is playing Avery Alder's Teen Witch, which is rooted in a simple truth. That something is fiction doesn't make it any less real. In order to play, you must convince yourself that you are a teenage girl who is also a witch, at least for the duration of a session of the game. As he plays, Percy takes solace in the lack of definition, of certainty, of stable objects on which to build his sense of who he is and who he will become. He proceeds on the strength of the fact that it feels right to him, even if he can't articulate exactly why.
Hi, friends. I'm Percy. This is PB, and our talk is called Liches, Lampreys, and the Moon, an incantation for trans life and lyrical play. This talk is not a talk. The paper it's based on is not a paper. It is a riposte, a game, a spell, a manifesto, an opening of a ritual circle, one that we invite you into. We are gathering to cast Secret Beauty so that we might learn to let go of the objects around which we build our work and our field, and in so doing, make them real.
We first turned to lyric games and their kinship with trans life in our contribution to the recent special issue of the Analog Games Journal focused on queer analog game studies. We called for a lyrical approach to the work of field building in response to the special issue's call for a queerer analog game studies, drawing on the relationships lyric games build with their players and the movement that has coalesced around their creation and design.
We wrote the piece because we are thinking about field building and about legibility and about the ways that the queer games movement of the 2010s, as much groundwork as it laid for crucial interventions in game studies, ultimately created a narrower definition of queer and of game and of studies than the folks behind it were intending. We aren't getting into details, we aren't naming names, but when the special issue invited us to imagine what a queerer future for analog game studies looks like, our response was to theorize a playful relation to our subfield itself, to our work as writers and scholars and makers.
We asked ourselves, what might it look like to approach queer analog game studies playfully, to build relations to our objects of study and to the field with all its institutional solemnity that themselves embody an entangled spirit of disavowal and deviant creative destruction?
This brings us to our key subject today. We contend that lyrical play and the creation of lyric games offer us a model for doing trans and queer scholarship in game studies, in part because lyric operates in much the same way trans often does, as a destabilizing force that erodes its own container without fear of what will happen when the objects that make it legible are gone.
Lyrical play is a trans mode of play in its commitment to unraveling and mutability, unstable, flickering, resistant to fixed interpretation. To trans, something is to be in playful relation to it, to adopt a new stance toward the objects that mediate our interaction with the world, one that makes those objects something to play with rather than revere.
To be in playful relation to our field then asks us to work without the kind of reverence that leads to stagnation and with openness to finding something unexpected in the ruins of seemingly stable objects like queer, analog, and game.
The ongoing lyric game movement represents the most experimental, oops, sorry, too quick, experimental and radical site of exploration for queer analog play. It encompasses games that eat other games, games that are one word long, anti games, and games that are not games but rather poems and manifestos and found photos and performances and all manner of mixed media art.
Attempting to define lyric games is not only Sisyphean, but violates the very ethos of lyric game design. Jay Dragon, in an interview with game designer Logan Timmons, argues that lyric game design is best understood as a community movement and a joint investment in experimental methodology. This is what a lot of people outside of lyric games get wrong, is that it's not a genre, it's a movement. Every definition I've seen is unsatisfactory. Instead, I'm interested in like this is a shared creative movement, or like it's an elaborate conversation happening between many people over the course of multiple years.
Also, hi, Jay.
Hi, Jay.
These works occupy a confounding cultural position. Lyric games are increasingly popular among players and designers, and yet there are no lyric games. On the one hand, Dragon and scholars like Jordan Magnuson claim that there is no governed genre of what is and isn't a lyric game. But on the other hand, Magnuson's recent volume Game Poems still serves as an academic overview of lyric video games as a genre. And similarly, Dragon, in the description for Altar Boys and Heretics, despite disavowing definitions of lyric games, describes the project as a collection of lyric games and even includes a definition, describing them as an emerging genre of games on itch.io that interrogate what it means for a game to be playable and in turn proposes its own answers.
The term lyric game is neither a critical taxonomy nor a legible marketing genre. It is a wink and a nudge and a salute to a specific community, ethos, and political movement. It is a disavowal of game as a viable heuristic category, even as the phrase lyric game persists as a sign beneath which to gather with those who share these artistic commitments.
And we point out this shifting rhetoric not to challenge these accounts, quite the opposite. The fact is, this is no contradiction. The lyrical here is not a label, not a genre, not an ontology, but a refusal of such things. It embodies a playful relation to the need to be legible at all.
As PB scans the page, the many ochre eyes of an eel-like fish stare back at her. The painting has been carefully positioned so that the creature, bent into playful cartilaginous squiggles, is only seen from above. Yet PB knows that underneath its rubbery mouth are orbital rows of teeth. PB realizes that, as rendered, the creature has seemingly latched onto the page itself. If the page were a fish, it would be having its flesh torn by the hooked tongue of this adorable, horrible, all-devouring parasite.
PB holds two games in her hands. The first is the core rulebook of a well known fantasy role playing game. The second, which features the aforementioned creature on the cover, is Richard Kelly's Universal Parasitic RPG supplement game Lamprey. Lamprey latches onto the core rulebook of another RPG. From there, players are instructed to tear pages from the host text. As the lamprey slowly feeds and the host wastes away entirely, the quiet in the room is suddenly punctuated by the sound of a page torn from its binding.
Lyrical play is an investment in creative unmaking. It is not contained by any game, but instead hemorrhages the very grammatology of games as a genre. In this way, lyric is a prepositional troubling that operates much like trans does. Neither are nouns, but unraveling verbs. The doublespeak of lyric game designers who simultaneously disavow the existence of lyric games, even as they sell their projects as lyric game bundles, is a lesson in this prepositional troubling.
For the aspiring lyrical play scholar, we must learn to likewise revel in the messy shit, unstable, unwieldy, and imploding ontologies. To play lyrically is to be in playful relation, which means anticipating change, anticipating shifting, not being precious about where we will end up, not taking anything for granted and as an authority.
You can have a lyrical relation to any game, not just lyric games. So why not a lyrical relation to a gender, a subfield, a paper, a conference presentation?
Nestled in the corner of a board game cafe in Brooklyn, Percy narrates the descent of a friend's character, Emile, into the depths of an abandoned metro station. Percy is facilitating Laurie O'Connell's Lichcraft, in which Emile must gather the spell and ritual components necessary to become a lich so that he can survive the 300-year-long wait list for an appointment at the gender clinic. As a group of ghosts materializes around a hidden fortune, the coins and bills that will grant Emile immortality, the player stops the session and says, "Can I be honest with you? If I got this money, I wouldn't do the ritual or become a lich at all. I'd just open my own gender clinic." After a pause, he continues, "But we can still do the session you prepped."
In this moment of play, Lichcraft's rules and premise can no longer hold. After encouraging us to prod at restrictive structures of mortality and morality, Percy and his player are brought, inevitably, to question the game's rigidity itself. In making his request to Percy, his friend has stopped playing by the rules of Lichcraft and instead expresses his desire for something beyond what the game's fiction has imagined, a world where trans people have money to open their own clinics and therefore don't need to become undead wizards.
In other words, he has started to play lyrically, with a spirit of exceeding this game that cannot contain all of the impulses and desires that its fiction elicits. Lichcraft makes living and waiting playful, and the lyrical play it inspires in turn makes the vessel of the game itself unbearable. The game welcomes its own destruction.
Play recontextualizes objects. Spells become game rules become fish food, gender transition becomes an arcane ritual. This recontextualization makes space for transformation and discovery that would be impossible if we were not open to destruction in the same breath as creation, to letting go of things even as we reach for others. We name this embodiment a trans, playful, lyrical mode.
If trans life challenges gender as a stable and coherent object, what kinship does that have with how lyric games challenge game as a stable and coherent object? What happens when we let go of needing stable and coherent objects at all? We might take a reminder here from Ada Mendez's collectible trading moon game. Everything is playable, even the moon.
In our call for building playful relations to our field's central objects, inspired by lyric games and the play they elicit, queer analog and game become the transforming rituals of our play rather than the fences of our playground.
So let us together turn our teeth on the rules we've inherited and the games we've been given. Let us privilege the acts of writhing, yearning, making, and unmaking over the fantasy of that which would name and contain us. What we need now is not coherence, but an unruly lyrical chorus, not permanence, but a politics of play that embraces flux, contradiction, and affective resonance. Lyrical play is not a method or a model, it is a practice of unbecoming, a spell, a breath, a tear in the page, a moon fight, a wish made aloud to the candles and the dark, knowing it may never be answered and making it anyway.
We depart from this ritual not with a framework, but with a field of possibility. To play lyrically is to linger with the unfinished, to trace the outlines of games that don't exist yet, to sit with the ache of what trans and queer life makes necessary, transformation. It is a crooked, joyful invitation to play with our scholarship as we play with games, messily and together.
And so we do not build a field. We scatter seeds in the open field beyond the playground, unsure of what might grow. We name nothing. We begin again.
The witches gather beyond the playground, writhing in the open field. The ground forgets its firmness.
Their bodies blur to verse, and the moon is devoured until only liches and lampreys remain. Thank y'all for
Thank
being here. If
you.
you would like to read the full thing, it is published somehow already now at Analog Game Studies, and you can find it at the QR code here.
It was magical. Thank y'all so much.